Who doesn't have an IRA yet? Self-directed. Pick up a package. Come on, get started. Now, I started going on these cruises with the Financial Friends Network, 2013, they were talking. 2014, they were talking. 2015, I finally opened self-directed. You know, like you have to hear it a few times. Just do it. And all I could do, I didn't have a big rollover, so I put whatever, 5 or 6, whatever I can put in it every year. And then the strategies that we'll hear at this conference, even more into tonight and into tomorrow, is how you can take a little bit of money and blow it up, right? But unplugging from Washington and Wall Street, unplugging from the Washington pieces, quit paying more taxes than you have to. And Quincy Long is an amazing guy. He's a favorite of mine.
Damn.
He's adorable. He's so smart.
My head's swelling so much, I just...
And I'm really blessed that given all that he has going on, that he chose to be here with us. So thank you so much, Quincy.
Thank you, Don. Oh, Lord. Okay, so I'm kind of trying to move away from long PowerPoints, and so this is my whole PowerPoint right here. So I can't send you my PowerPoint. Actually, I guess I could, but anyway, so you'll just have to put up with me. So Don has told me I've got 2 days to go over the prohibited transaction rules and stuff like that. So that's what we'll be doing for the rest of the time. Is that right, Don? It was something like that. Was it 2 days?
Was that what Trish was telling you?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was 2 days, but no, seriously, how much time do you want me to have here?
Let's go, 30, 40 right now, and then we'll bring you back again.
Okay, so I have 3 hours worth of material to do in 30 minutes. Wow, that's going to be fun. So first of all, I just seriously want to thank Dawn for inviting me here. She knows I'm trying to cut down on my speaking, but it's not working very well. And who could turn down those baby blues, you know what I mean? No. But truly, as I got here and met and networked with you people, I realized this is the premium group. I mean, there's a lot of good, really good brains here and some different levels of experience. And I don't usually get to speak to groups this small. I'm usually speaking to a bigger crowd. So it's actually a pleasure for me to be able to have more interaction, and especially in the evening. So I really thank you, Dawn, for having me speak. Well, so I won't waste too much time on me. In fact, I won't waste any time on me except to say that I'm another damn attorney, though I don't practice law unless I get a speeding ticket. Figure that one out. What I do, of course, is I own, as I said earlier, founder and president of Quest IRA, so we provide the self-directed IRAs, and we'll talk all about that. And we have offices in Texas, in Houston, Dallas, and Austin, and we do service people from all over the country, so that's enough wasting time on that. So I want to get into, Don told me to talk about what you can and cannot do with the self-directed IRA. Then I wrote notes on all kinds of things I wanted to talk about in 30 minutes. So I'm not sure how this is going to go, but...
No, well, go 45 or something, but you...
Oh, we're increasing the time already. I'd like this. Tell you what, people, don't tell Dawn, but when we're running out of time, say, more, Quincy, more. Okay, so I'm just going to go through some real quick introduction, like to make sure everybody understands that with self-directed IRA, there's 7 different things that you can self-direct. So I always mention this because I know some of you are not really heard of this before. That would be the traditional IRA, and I'm not going to go over the features of each type because we'd be here all day if I did that, but you can always ask me. So the traditional IRA, the Roth IRA, which is the one we all want, right? Especially the inherited Roth. Anybody remember that? What Walter said? Mm-hmm. Talk to Walter about that. That's an incredible thing to make tax-free money. Then you got the SEP IRA, S-E-P IRA, the simple IRA, which is actually the most complicated kind of IRA they have. It's true. It's true. And if you have no employees, self-employment income, you can do an individual 401k. In other words, you don't have to be a big corporation, have your own 401k plan. And then you can self-direct what we call the would you like fries with that accounts, which are the health savings account and the Coverdell Education Savings account for the kiddos, or mine. I can give you their account numbers if you need them. So just keep that in mind. As far as investment options, obviously you can buy real estate itself. You can buy notes, which is what we're primarily going to talk about at this conference. You can buy options. Walter will talk a little bit about options. You can buy private placements, which like LLCs, limited partnerships, private corporation as opposed to publicly traded corporation, all kinds of things. And I've done just about all of them. We use trust sometimes, and I've used just about all of these techniques. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time because of the time restrictions, but you can ask me about my wacky investment stories, and I'll be happy to go over them. So what she asked me to talk about first of all, and primarily in this session, I assume that she'll invite me back for another session sometime later. Is that right, Dawn?
Yeah, we're working you. You got all this brain juice. Of course,
Yeah, the brain juice was a little fried after last night, but anyway, what she wanted me to talk about is not something that's very sexy or that sells very well, which is what you cannot do in a self-directed IRA. These are called the prohibited transaction rules, okay? So doesn't that sound exciting? But the truth of the matter is, if you don't understand these rules, she talks about blowing up your IRA. What she means when she says blowing up is increasing the value of the IRA exponentially, right, Dawn? I think that's what you mean.
that's what they were.
That is what you mean. When I say blowing up your IRA, it means it's distributed to you as of the first day of the year you did the prohibited transaction, even if that was years ago. And you have to pay taxes, penalties, and all that money that you thought you were making tax-free, no, that was all taxable, and you've screwed up your tax return for all those years too. And so this is not something to play around with, okay? You have to know some of these rules. So I'm going to try to make this as easy on you as possible because I have a few other issues I would like to just comment on. So let's talk about those rules. The first thing you need in order to understand the prohibited transaction rules is you must understand who is a disqualified person. You can shorten that in your notes to DP, disqualified person. And you have to know who you're not allowed to do business with, okay? So there's a lot of them, but here's the core. You can't directly or indirectly. Now let me say that again. You can't directly or indirectly either enter into a transaction with your IRA or benefit any of these people that we're going to talk about, okay? So who are they? Who would you think would be first on the list that you can't benefit? Abby?
Criminals and felons.
Criminals and felons. Well, no, there's no restriction on that. Next guess? Mom and dad? Wife?
Your son.
Son? Children, grandchildren, all good guesses so far. You! Now wait a minute. That can't be right? That's your money, isn't it?
Nope.
No, it's not your money. It's Mr. or Ms. Ira's money. And Mr. or Ms. Ira is a separate legal person from you. And furthermore, you are a caretaker or a fiduciary for Mr. or Ms. Ira's funds. Now, it's true that Mr. and Ms. Ira might give you some funds from time to time, right? And Mr. and Ms. Ira is eventually going to die, and you'll probably get all the funds in the account. But Mr. and Ms. Ira is a separate legal person from you, and every action that you take must be for the benefit of Mr. and Mrs. Ira, and not for the benefit of you or any of these other disqualified persons. That's a tough concept to get, but does anybody have a question on that? Because if you don't get that, you won't get the rest of it. So you can't benefit directly or indirectly yourself or any other disqualified person, nor can you enter into a transaction with any of those people with your IRA. And you can only get the money when you take it as a distribution from the IRA, either upon death or, upon turning appropriate age. Yes, Deidre, I can sense that you have a question.
Yeah, I'm struggling. So, wouldn't the nature of the investment itself benefit you?
It has nothing to do with the investment itself.
Okay.
Nothing.
So what does it have to do with then
It has to do with you can't benefit as a person, directly or indirectly, or any of these other disqualified persons, for any transaction done in your IRA and any investment done in your IRA. Okay?
What's the purpose of it then?
Yeah,
If you can't benefit from it?
Your IRA.
Well, because eventually, David, it's a good question. He said, what's the purpose then if you can't benefit from it? Well, I didn't say you couldn't benefit from the distributions from it. It's when you're doing these transactions, while you're doing them, you're not allowed to benefit at that point. You have to wait until Mr. and Ms. Ira kicks the bucket and distributes it all to you, or whether Mr. and Ms. Ira just feels like giving you some money. Until it's out of the IRA, it belongs to Mr. and Ms. Ira and not to you.
What's a good example
A good example,
of like you can't benefit now?
well, we're going to go over that next, but the first step you have to understand is who's disqualified. So we understand that these people, even if you have an imperfect understanding, you understand that there are certain people that are bad people as far as benefiting your transactions within your IRA, right? So who are they? You got a lot of them. The first one on the list is you. You can't. Now I know you'll get the money eventually, but in the meantime you can't touch it, okay? So you can't. Your spouse can't. Your parents and grandparents can't. Your kids and grandkids can't. Nobody on the linear up and down family channel can benefit or enter into a transaction with your IRA. Okay, so far so good? Now, when any of those combination of those people that I just mentioned own or control 50% or more of a corporation, partnership, trust, or estate, then that corporation, partnership, trust, or estate becomes disqualified as well.
50% or more.
50% more. It's not just you, it's any of those family members also.
But what about a business partner? Okay.
I'm not kidding. I'm taking you one step at a time. One step at a time. Okay? So, everybody understand that you will, if you own or control, either directly or indirectly through your family members, a 50% or more of the corporation, partnership, trust, or estate, that entity becomes disqualified. Yes? Okay, so far so good. Then the next level is, if a entity is disqualified, so who else in the entity is disqualified? A business partner owning 10% or more of that same entity, or a joint venture partner, or a shareholder, or a beneficiary of the trust, or anybody that owns or controls 10% or more of something that you own or control 50% or more of is disqualified. Wait a minute. All right, go ahead. I'm not done, but okay.
So my business partner and I own a real estate brokerage together. It's a corporation.
How much does each party
We
own?
both own 50-50.
Okay, now
Okay.
he's disqualified, so you know that.
So even like if it's a separate deal not involved in,
It has nothing to do with that at all.
because we do deals together and design all the time.
Yes, it has nothing to do with that at all.
So
It's a good question. His question is, we own the 50-50. What if the deal has nothing to do with what we own 50-50? It's nothing to do with it
So
whatsoever.
he can't lend me money from his IRA.
He cannot loan you money from his IRA. Bo, I've got it. We're recording this, Bo.
It's not my IRA.
He was planning on it too.
So, okay, so you understand that concept, right? Once he's disqualified, because you own 50% or more of that entity, anybody who owns 10% or more of that entity is also disqualified. Also, any key employees are disqualified. So that would be an employee making 10% or more of the wages of the company. Also, managers, directors, officers, anybody that controls the entity are also disqualified. Okay?
Where'd you get this guy?
Okay, are you with me? So let's step back a minute. I have a cute little chart for that, but I don't have any PowerPoints right now. Maybe I'll show it to you later. Okay, but the point is that the rules, the prohibited transaction rules, are meant to make sure that the transactions within your IRA are arm's length transactions. Now, if you own 50% of an entity, that ain't an arm's length transaction, people. All right, it's just not. And so they cut those off. So the other concept that I wanted to get out there about disqualified persons is that there's always, 100% of the time, a disqualified person involved in a transaction within a self-directed IRA. And who's that? You. And if you benefit either directly or indirectly, then you've got a potential for a prohibited transaction. So that means if you do a transaction that benefits somebody in whom you have an interest which would affect your best judgment as a fiduciary for your IRA, that could be a prohibited transaction as an indirect benefit to you. Here's an example. Suppose you own 25% of a corporation. That corporation employs you and you're about to go under. The corporation meaning, right? But your IRA has $1 million and was willing to invest in the corporation to save the business. Is that corporation disqualified under the rules?
Yes.
No? No? Nobody did. I said 25%, right? But are you going to benefit from that transaction? Yes, you are. That's a problem. Okay? So there's always one person involved at least who's disqualified, and the question is not, is there a disqualified person involved in this transaction? Rather, the question is there one involved in an impermissible way? Okay? So then the next level is, now you've got a concept, at least a grasp, a general concept of disqualified persons. Now the next thing you got to know is, what can't you do with these people? You can invest in almost anything with a self-directed IRA, except for antique or collectibles and life insurance contracts. Everything else that you can hold title to is fair game, right? That's the concept of self-directed IRAs. You can invest in almost anything. So for these people, these disqualified persons, there are a list of things that you're not permitted to do with them. Okay? Even though IRAs can generally do all these things with just about anybody, these people you can't do business with or benefit. Okay? So you ready for that list? Sounds like what?
More bad news.
Well, it wouldn't do any good to have a bad list unless you had a bad list of actions to follow up with it, right? So the bad list of actions is you can't buy, sell, or lease property between a disqualified person and an IRA or other plan. That doesn't seem too hard to understand, does it? So, for example, if I have a note that yields 16%, which I do, I would love for my IRA to have that. Do you know what I'm saying? Can I transfer that to my IRA?
No.
No, I cannot. Can I sell it to my IRA? No, I cannot. It's just off limits. So generally the rule is, once you get your grubby little hands on it, your IRA is out of the picture, generally. Okay? So I'm trying to make this simple and understandable. So everybody's kind of got that. That is not really too hard to understand. Yes, Dawn.
I've heard different things from where there's some people that saying that you can say, well, I'm putting in 50% of the money and my IRA is putting in 50% of the money on a deal. I mean, I've literally...
Yes, there are many people that try to split the deal between themselves personally. Let me finish the talk and the general rules, then we'll get to that specific question. Yes?
Can you use it as collateral?
No, you cannot use it as collateral for a loan. That's in Section 408. That's not prohibited transaction. That's just against the IRA rules. All right, so you can't buy, sell, or lease, right? So, for example, Patty, if you bought a warehouse, could you go store could you lease it to your personally owned company to store your junk in there?
Nope.
No, you can't. Sorry. What if you paid fair market rent for it? Would that make a difference?
No.
Nope, doesn't make a difference. It's just a no-no. The rules are just the rules. They don't have to make sense, okay? So I think we got that one. That's pretty easy, right? The next thing is there can't be an extension of credit from the IRA to a disqualified person or the other way around. These go both ways, by the way. Not you to the IRA and not the IRA to you, okay? So the next thing is extension of credit. So everybody knows that you can, probably has heard that you can take a distribution from an IRA and return it within 60 days, right? Everybody heard of that? But that's not a loan. That's just a distribution and a rollover, and that's not a loan. So that's not what I'm talking about. A loan is literally, I'm going to loan you money for a period of time, and then you pay it back. So you can't borrow money from your IRA, and you can't loan money to your IRA. So borrowing money from your IRA, that's not really hard to understand, is it? But what about loaning money to your IRA? If you have a house that you want to buy, can you advance the earnest money for your IRA?
No.
No, you can't. Not if you're doing it correctly, because that would be loaning the money to the IRA on a temporary basis. How about this one? This recently came up in tax court. Can you loan money to, or guarantee a loan on a company that your IRA owns?
No.
Can you guarantee a loan on a company that your IRA owns part of?
No.
Dawn?
You can personally guarantee.
No, you cannot.
I'm sorry.
You cannot personally guarantee a debt on behalf of your IRA, and that includes guaranteeing a debt on behalf of an entity owned by your
That's why
IRA.
you gotta get non-recourse loans.
No, I'm catching it.
Wow,
When you buy-
that's tricky, isn't it? So extension of credit works both ways. They can't loan to you, you can't loan to them, okay? What's the next thing? This is where we start to get hairy, Don, sorry. Those were the two easy ones, people. So the next thing you can't do is you can't have an extension of goods, services, or facilities between disqualified person and the IRA. So what does that mean? Well, for example, goods, that's not too hard to understand. If you had for example, a piece of land and you wanted to build a house on it, could you supply the materials to the IRA and have somebody build the house?
No.
No, you can't do that because that would be a provision of goods, right? That makes sense. What about facilities? Again, if you have, like we had a request one time for a person that wanted to buy land next to her personal land, and I said, well, you can't use the land that's in your IRA for any purpose. So, for example, you couldn't run your cattle on the land next door, right? And she laughed and she said, I'm from Connecticut. It's not a problem. But the point is, you can't utilize facilities or other property owned by the IRA to benefit yourself or any of those people. Well, that's cool. Then we get down to services. What in the hell does that mean? If we have been trying to figure that out for years, nobody knows what the term services mean, because obviously you can pick investments for your IRA all day long, right? That seems like a service, but it's really investment activity. Does that make sense to everybody? This is as near as I can get to something that makes sense. On the other hand, can you go and build a house using your labor and your materials on a piece of property owned by your IRA?
No.
Clearly not. You are providing services to your IRA. Oh, how about this one? If you're a note queen, can you broker a note to your IRA?
Yes, but you can't charge a fee.
Oh. Now your stomach starts to quiver here, doesn't it? Right? What do? Where's the line? Where's the difference between being a fiduciary or an investment caretaker, if you will, for your IRA and turning the thing over? I'm sorry, do I move too much?
No, you're good. Don't worry, Quincy.
And turning it over into a service, right? Well, one of the things you can think about if you're trying to be ultra conservative is what would your activities be considered if you did those same activities outside of the context of the IRA? Would it be a service? Is it something that people get paid to do? You're probably in the gray zone, right? Now, there are some things that are way over the line, like building a house owned by your IRA or building a house on land owned by your IRA. Clearly, that's over the line. But what about spending $100 a week looking for great notes? Not that you broker, that you buy directly, of course. I would think you would never, ever broker a note to your IRA, right, Don?
What's that even mean?
What does that even mean? I wish I had the answer. See, the problem is with the tax court cases, when they catch people doing a prohibited transaction, the problem is there's always other prohibited transactions. There's never been a case where it's purely a services issue. There's always something more. So when you're doing these things that might be called the services, there's 3 ways they can attack you on it, right? The first way is a prohibited transaction. That's by far the most serious way. If they attack you on that, then you blow up your IRA, right? The second way they could attack you is by arguing that you were making an undue contribution to your IRA. Now, the penalties aren't nearly as bad for that, but you know, the penalties are there. They just don't blow up your IRA. And the third thing they could do is they could say that you were providing services, therefore what it was not an investment activity, but a business activity. And if there's business activity, then there's taxes that are owed on that, which I won't get too far into that. So the services issue is one of the toughest things that you can deal with in this area. Then the next one is a real doozy, because it says the use by or for the benefit of the income or assets of the plan for any disqualified person. What in God's name does that just mean? Well, here's what I think it means. Any direct or indirect benefit to you or another disqualified person is going to get you into a potential prohibited transaction. So let's take an example. If you had, Patty, I'll use you. What's your name again? Catherine? Yeah, because I know her, but I never read her name tag. But if you had, Catherine, a beach house in Belize, would that be okay in your IRA?
Yes.
Yeah, it's an acceptable investment. Now, pay attention now. Can you lease that at fair market value from your IRA?
Not to me.
Not to you, that's right, or any other disqualified person, right? But how about this? Instead of leasing it, how about you go down and check it out to make sure it's safe as part of your fiduciary duties for a week?
Probably not.
Yeah, probably not, because you'd be making use out of an asset owned by your IRA. Everybody kind of see the way that works? And then the next one is only between fiduciaries and IRAs, but it's essentially the same kind of rule. And finally, the last rule would be that you cannot take any commission or fee from any party for a transaction with your IRA. So in Dawn's case, even if the seller of the note was paying Dawn a fee for her to broker that note, she could not broker that note to the IRA. Even if the IRA is not paying the fee, it doesn't make any difference. Or if you're a realtor and there's a piece of property, real estate bought by your IRA, then the IRA would not be able to, you would not be able to obtain a commission even if the seller of the property was paying the commission. So no use by the fiduciary of any assets or income from the plan is the other rule. So that's a little quick summary, and as I said, if you get caught, what are the penalties? One, for the IRA owner, it blows up the IRA and it's deemed to be distributed to you as of January 1st, the year in which you did the prohibited transaction. Now, how fast do you think they catch these things? Take a guess.
On average, 10 years later.
He says 10 years. It could be years. They don't catch them right away, right?
How do they capture me?
That's a good question. How do they capture them? Well, there's a lot of ways they can do it. One of the biggest ways is somebody tattles, like an ex-wife or something like that, or an ex-business partner. No, I'm just saying. Another way is that some dumbass gets up and describes it in an event that's being recorded and going to be posted all over the internet. Walter might fit in that category. And another thing that happens that I've seen happen is don't ever do something like this. Put on your tax return, interest paid to dad's IRA. That has gotten people into trouble before. But the interesting thing is, the most interesting thing that happens is not that the IRS catches you, because they are understaffed and don't have as much expertise as they need to chase all this down. The most interesting thing that happens is that because of a couple of court decisions, the bankruptcy trustees now will go, if you have a big IRA when you go and file for bankruptcy, they're going to do discovery and dig through your IRA, see if they can catch a prohibited transaction, because if they do, it's no longer an IRA and it's subject to seizure for creditors. So that's probably more how people get caught these days than the other way around. Yes, Patty?
If you have a prohibited transaction in one IRA, does it affect your other IRA?
Good question. The question is, if you have a prohibited transaction in one IRA, does it affect the others? It should not. Although, if I was the IRS and I wanted to try that argument, I might fail, but all traditional IRAs are considered as one for purposes of some rules in the code, and all Roths are considered as one for other rules in the code, right? So you might argue that, but I think largely the answer would be no. It would blow up the IRA that had the prohibited transaction. So isn't that a fun topic? I can tell that you all want to rush out and do self-directed IRAs, don't you? Yeah.
So what if someone did a prohibited transaction?
What if someone did something?
Let's say it was
I
this.
didn't do anything.
You heard of a case. There was a situation you heard of.
Perhaps it was this calendar year, which is not over yet. Can they undo it?
Oh, good question. So she said basically, if they've done a prohibited transaction, can they undo it if it's in the same calendar year? Really doesn't matter if it's in the same calendar year. The technical rule is that there's no forgiveness in the code. They say confession is good for the soul. That may be true, but it's not good for the pocketbook, okay? So, confessing is not the right idea. The best thing that you can do if you think you've done something wrong, honestly, is undo it as much and as quickly as you can, and then pray. If you're so inclined to do. And I won't tell you the other ways I suggest, but that's when you're going to have to get me after hours for the rest of the answer to that question. Okay, so let me address Dawn's question, because she specifically asked me a question is, I've seen people partner with their IRAs, basically. And I have too. And here's kind of the way it looks like. Remember the part where I said you couldn't have a use by or for the benefit of a disqualified person of the income or assets of the plan, right? Direct or indirect benefit. It could be argued, here would be the argument, Dawn. It could be argued that if you could not have done that deal without the assistance of the IRA or the other way around, then a disqualified person has benefited from that transaction. And that would be the argument that would be used to justify a prohibited transaction, is that you benefited by being able to do the transaction when you couldn't have otherwise done so. Now, does that mean it's always illegal or prohibited to do a transaction jointly with your IRA? I don't think so, because there's at least one ruling, which is not a court case, but still it's a Department of Labor ruling that said as long as the IRAs invest like this, side by side with no benefit more than one to another or whatever, that as long as there's no more than a quote-unquote incidental benefit, that will not violate at least the first two provisions of the prohibited transaction rules. Okay, so everybody celebrates that ruling and thinks it's really cool and don't read the rest of it, which gives warnings on stuff like, well, if there became a conflict later on, you would have to dispose of that conflict or it would become a prohibited transaction. Let me give you an example of that. Let's suppose you and the IRA partnered on a note, because we are at a note conference, right? You and your IRA partnered on a note, and you invested your IRA fully. I mean, you were so convinced that it was going to be a good note. And guess what? It became a NPN, or non-performing note. And now there's $1,500 in foreclosure fees. But you say, that's no problem. I'll just pay the $1,500. Have you just done a prohibited transaction?
Yes.
Yes, you clearly have, because you've advanced money on behalf of your IRA for a bill that it owns. So that's one problem. And you can't, again, you can't be seen to be using the IRA to complete the transaction. So let me give you another example, because examples are good, right? Let me give you another example. I own about 1% of Icon Bank. And when Icon Bank first came out, their minimum capital contribution was $50,000. And I had my retirement plan, I don't remember which one at this point, I had my retirement plan invest $50,000, and I invested $50,000 personally. Now, have I violated any rules? Well, I would say not, because I met the minimum contribution both in my IRA or my retirement plan and individually, and there was no benefit. We were all just equal shareholders. On the other hand, if I didn't have anything but $25,000 in my bank account, and I needed the IRA to get the other $25,000, that would seem to be more problematic, because I couldn't have done the transaction without it. The other thing is that you'll have to look at the entire, this is for the notes too, you have to look at the entire transaction from beginning to end to see if there's a problem. So, for example, if you loan money to a strange person that you just don't know of, and you like them, you just casually know them and you like them, right? So you loan them money, and they pay it over the years, and slowly you fall in love, and you want to get married. The minute you get married, what do you have? A prohibited transaction, because at that point you owe, one person owes the other spouse's IRA money. And that cannot be. That's a prohibited transaction, even though it happened years later, even though it was fine when it happened. You have to look at the whole transaction. So there's a lot of situations that you can be fine on to start with, and then it goes in the toilet later. And you got to figure out how and when that happens and how to deal with it. Right? Does that make sense? Do you understand that, Dawn? So what about things like, how about this one? I got it. Since I said anybody in the linear up and down scenario is disqualified, right? Remember I said that? So what about stepkids? I mean, they aren't related to you, right? Is that okay? Can you deal with stepkids?
No.
Yes, you can.
Really depends on the situation. More no you can't than yes you can. Though they are not on the list, that's true. There's always one person on the list. And if you raise those stepkids like you did for Teresa's son, is that a person you really have no interest in whatsoever? Of course not. It's a person who's very much affects your heart and your decision making. Therefore, benefiting him is an indirect benefit to you. Oh, what about, I got it. How about brothers and sisters? They're not on the list because it's not up and down. Is that okay?
No.
No, well, it could be okay, but it's not very safe, because again, these indirect rules. So here's an example of that. I actually had somebody come to me and say, can I loan my brother money at reasonable interest rate, unsecured? And I said, well, maybe, but what's he going to do with the money? Oh, he's going to repay me some money he owes me personally. No, you can't do that. Sorry. Yes? Can you adopt a wealthy kid who has a big Roth IRA? I don't know. Are you up for adoption, Walter? Can you adopt a kid? Well, of course you can adopt a kid with an IRA. What does that got to do with anything? Okay, so how about this one? This is the test, right? And this is my last example, and I'm going to go on and say cheerier things, okay? So how about this? Imagine this scenario. You're married, and your mother-in-law needs a place to live. Now, your mother-in-law is clearly not on the list. Is that correct? Everybody agrees with that? So it surely seems it's okay, isn't it, then, to buy a piece of property and lease it to your mother-in-law at fair market rental rates, right? What do you guys think? Why not? Indirectly benefits who? Your spouse, and maybe you. That's exactly right. And as a matter of fact, if you don't get a pretty direct personal benefit from that, I think you got a problem in your relationship anyway. So, I don't want to waste too much time on this topic. It's just part of the things you have to know, and I think I have a few more things that I want to go over, and then we can go back to Q&A. Is that fair, Dawn?
Yeah.
Yeah, but. Okay, Dawn, what do you want me to do?
Well, because I keep going around, so my sister's got, she was self-directed that she rolled over with you. And I thought I was disqualified, so I was really having a hard time, getting something that would fit and not, then I was on, and then someone said, oh no, they're, you can do brother, sister. I go, oh, okay, so the next time I find a property, we can joint venture on it, and now you just undo it.
No, I didn't undo it. I didn't undo it at all. I said you have to be careful how you do deals with your siblings, because though they are not on the list, you are. Okay? The focus, see, that's exactly what happens.
What would be an example of careful in that situation?
Well, let me say one thing first. That's exactly what happens is what Dawn hears, is that people say like, oh, okay, I only own 49% of that corporation, and I know by definition that corporation is not on the list, boom, I'm good, right? But that's not true, because they forget about the one person that's always involved, and the indirect benefit rule, which says that if you own a substantial interest in a company and you invest in that company, then you're likely to benefit yourself. Indirectly. Not directly, but indirectly. So that's what you're facing there, is you're trying to figure out what's an indirect benefit, and the people that are just answering the question, oh yeah, you can do anything you want to with your brother or sister, they just don't understand the rule. So if you're going to do business with your brother or sister, let's be careful in the sense of making sure it's commercially reasonable, for example, that it's not looking like you're stuffing their account or something like that. I don't like to do that, Dawn, but if I did, it would be way arm's length, way commercially reasonable, way in the same way that I do everything else. Does that make sense? Does that help a little bit? So I'm not trying to undo anything. I'm just, the rules are as confusing to us as they are to you, except we live with them and deal with them every day. So we're more used to it. And that's why it's such a pleasure to say I don't give tax, legal, investment, or structuring advice, because then you can't take anything I say seriously. Yes, Dennis?
In Don's example with teaming up with family member,
Yeah.
is it best to go 50-50 on
It doesn't make any difference whether you go 50-50 or 75-25. It's all, that's not going to change the issue at all. And so, by the way, let me tell you, on the partnering with my IRA thing, my general rule is very clear. I do not co-invest with my IRA. Almost never, okay? So I don't feel like that feels too icky to me, too chancy to me. Now, having said that, let me say something. I'm a little in the gray area here, but I know where the line is, and you guys don't. But let me tell you what I do. I do. Wait a minute. That just didn't sound right. But anyway, what I will do is I will partner disqualified IRAs together on equal terms pro rata in the same deal. So I have done a lot of deals where my Roth IRA and my wife's Roth IRA and my kids' Coverdell, all of which are disqualified to each other, all join together and share an investment, and of course share in the returns from that investment or losses in the same proportion they contributed to money. Now, is that any legal difference from me and them partnering together personally? Not one legal bit. But it doesn't have the same icky feeling to me. And I just don't see them getting too upset about two IRAs that are tax deferred partnering together versus you where they're going to collect taxes immediately or not. I can't give you a rationale for it other than my gut tells me that partnering IRAs together are probably, now I know they're much safer than partnering your personal money with your IRA. But there's no legal distinction, it's just a gut check. Yes, Gene?
Is it one of those things where, what you're saying, could you have done it singly, or?
As part of it, if you could done it singly, that helps.
Oh, okay, you could have.
I just, as a general rule, it's supposed to be arm's length, and I don't call it arm's length if there's something that I'm personally involved with and my IRA is involved with. Again, I'm not going to be able to give you the answer, because there is no answer. But the purpose of me describing these rules to you is basically so you have an idea that there are some restrictions, and if it feels like it's not an arm's length transaction for whatever reason, it should throw up a caution flag, and you should be careful doing how you do that. Yes?
So if you did do it with yourself and your IRA,
Yes.
that would pretty much prohibit you from working on your property at all, correct?
Absolutely. If you did buy a property or a note with your IRA and personally, the whole thing, it's like the whole thing is in your IRA because you got to be hands off on that. That's absolutely correct. Yes, Bo?
I've had good amount of success talking to people and having them roll their retirement into some form of self-directed.
Okay, good.
But I've never heard you talk about, which I'm just kind of curious when I'm talking to people, so I have a general understanding of how do I know what's eligible to roll over if they're still working at the company? I mean, I know it's more on that, but are there any tips that we can, because I want to raise more money that way?
So how do you know what's eligible to roll over? The first thing you can do is there's a nice little handy chart in the IRS publication 590A that gives you the rollover rules. That's a good start. Generally for rules of rollovers that are from employer plans where they still work is fairly limited. And the best thing you can do, because plans are different in their construction, generally the rule is you can't get to it until you have a separation or some other distributable event. But generally you just tell them, go see and check with your HR department or whoever runs the plan and see if there's any amount you can roll into an IRA. That's the best I can tell you on that. Okay? Yes, Barbara.
I have a what if.
A what if?
Yes.
You heard of this scenario one time.
What if you have a note
What if you have a note?
and the homeowner defaults?
Homeowner defaults.
You don't have it serviced because the note's too messy.
Don't have it serviced. So we're going to get into that subject in just a minute.
And then you send a letter to that homeowner and tell him he's late and this is how much he owes.
So you send a
Is that
letter.
prohibited service?
So you're servicing your own note, effectively.
Right. I'm only a representative of Miss Ira.
Yes, you're right, but you're servicing your own note.
Yes.
I mean, would anybody kill you for a letter? Probably not. Well, should you go and service your notes owned by your IRA? Kathy?
No, you should not.
Okay.
Well, that letter, was it FDCPA compliant?
Oh.
You don't know.
All right, this is a good segue.
Well, I'm not done yet.
No, it wasn't.
I'm not done yet.
Service, okay?
Well, we're almost done now.
Are we really?
I know, you're doing so well.
Crap. Okay, can you flip notes in your eye? I got to do.
Is it okay if I stand here?
Yes.
Right by you?
Well, okay, you're going to spoil my fun. Can you flip notes, Dawn? Yes or no in your IRA?
As long as it's not active. So like one or two a year, maybe. If you're running an active business, like if you're flipping properties in your IRA, that's prohibited. Like if you're doing a lot. I mean, one or two a year, you're fine.
Well, see, he's got an interesting thing. We're going to have to talk about this more later because Dawn is gonna,
You're construed as running a business.
if you're running a business, that could be unrelated business income tax, it could be construed as an excess contribution, it could also be construed as a prohibited transaction by providing services to your plan. So be careful. Let's see, don't service your own notes, that's a really bad idea. Golly.
That has nothing to do with an IRA, that's just in general.
You know, I guess I'll quit there, Dawn, but I don't want to scare you off. I have lots of cool things to talk about, but I hope, you know, maybe later we can get to those. Right, Dawn?
Exactly, because,
Gosh, I have all kinds of nice.
You're PowerPoint, don't throw it away. Well, the thing is, like, you could get all excited about what's possible, because like when you show the numbers, you know, with, if you don't pay taxes, how fast you can compound, it's so stunning. But then if you don't go in doing it right, it's for nothing anyway.
Right.
So, so we will definitely get back to the exciting stories that you have that are very sexy and hot.
Dawn, the way you say sexy and hot is sexy and hot. Sorry, Dries, it's true. Don't blame me.
Thank you very much, Quincy. Thank you for making it fun.